Are you looking for work too? Annie asked as she broke her sandwich in half and held one piece out to the man sitting alone on a park bench. Richard Bennett lowered his eyes to the sandwich in her small hand. It contained only a few slices of turkey, a thin piece of cheese, and a little mustard between two slices of bread that had grown slightly dry after spending the entire day in a paper bag. He looked up at Annie. Do I really look unemployed? Annie paused. She glanced at the empty space beside him, then turned toward the stream of people hurrying out of the park. Men in suits and women in office dresses were heading toward train stations, parking garages, and bus stops as the last of the afternoon sunlight disappeared behind the buildings. May I sit here? Richard moved the jacket beside him out of the way. Of course. Annie sat at the other end of the bench. Her arm remained extended, the sandwich still offered to him. I was only guessing, she said. Everyone else is leaving work around this time, but you're sitting here alone. Your shirt is a little wrinkled, you aren't wearing a tie, and you look as though you haven't slept properly in several nights. Richard looked down at his rolled-up sleeves. Do I look that bad? I didn't say you looked bad. Then what do you think I look like? Annie studied his face for another moment. Tired. Like something is worrying you. She hesitated before adding, and possibly unemployed. Richard laughed. Only an hour earlier, he had been seated at the head of a long conference table inside Bennett Corporation. Senior executives surrounded him, arguing over the figures displayed on a screen. Charles Whitmore had proposed eliminating 3,000 jobs before the end of the year. The finance department called it a necessary measure. The board called it protecting shareholder interests. After the meeting, Richard's head felt heavy. He left the building through a side entrance, told his driver to go home, removed his tie, loosened his collar, and began walking. He kept going until the glass towers of downtown were behind him, and the ringing phone in his pocket no longer tempted him to answer. And now, a young stranger had mistaken him for a man without a job. Richard looked at the sandwich again. You should keep it, he said. You may need it more than I do. Annie did not pull her hand back. Go ahead and eat it. I'm fine. You don't look fine. I'm not hungry. The moment he finished speaking, his stomach gave a loud, unmistakable growl. Annie raised an eyebrow at him. Richard closed his eyes for a moment. That was unfortunate timing. It sounded more honest than you did. She placed the sandwich half on the paper wrapper between them. Take it. I already broke it in half, and I can't put it back together. Richard looked at the piece she had given him, then at the one remaining in Annie's hand. Hers was clearly smaller. You gave me the bigger half. I didn't split it evenly. You did that on purpose. Annie gave a small shrug, then consider it a little encouragement. Encouragement for what? Your job search. Richard nearly laughed again. He had eaten nothing since a slice of toast early that morning. The lunch his secretary had placed on his desk remained untouched because one person after another had entered his office carrying reports, contracts, and decisions they expected him to make. He picked up the sandwich and took a bite. The bread was slightly dry, and the cheese had softened after sitting in the bag for hours. Yet to Richard, it tasted better than anything ever served on a silver tray during a board meeting. A young woman who had only one sandwich to last the entire day had willingly shared half of it with him. Thank you, Richard said. You're welcome. Annie began eating her half in very small bites. She chewed slowly, as though trying to make the little food she had last longer. A faded canvas bag rested near her feet. The top would not close completely, revealing several job applications with bent corners, an inexpensive pen, a nearly empty bottle of water, and a pair of worn flats with scuffed toes. Richard looked at her feet. Annie was wearing a different pair of shoes, but they had rubbed the backs of her heels until the skin was red. She had probably been walking for hours and changed shoes along the way so she could continue searching for work. He nodded toward the papers. Are you looking for work too? Since this morning. How many places have you tried? Annie lowered her head and counted. 2 restaurants, 3 hotels, a grocery store, a clothing store, a coffee shop, and a warehouse. Richard looked at her. You went to all those places today? I left home very early. And none of them hired you? Annie smoothed the edge of the sandwich wrapper. No one gave me a real interview. What did they tell you? Richard asked. Some said I didn't have enough experience. Others wanted a degree or professional references. Annie looked down at the small piece of sandwich in her hand. One manager told me the position had already been filled, but when I walked out, the now hiring sign was still hanging in the window. What kind of work are you looking for? Anything steady. Front desk work, serving tables, cleaning rooms, washing dishes, or warehouse work. She looked at him. I don't mind starting early or staying late. I'm not afraid of hard work either. You've never worked anywhere before? I have. Just not at the kind of jobs that look impressive on an application. Annie watched the people passing in front of them. I often help older people in my neighborhood with their shopping and housework. I've cleaned apartments, helped prepare meals at church dinners, and arranged tables and chairs for community events. I can handle cash, keep track of supplies, speak with customers, and follow instructions. Her fingers tightened slightly around the paper wrapper, but none of that counts as experience because I don't have a company name to write on the application. Richard did not answer immediately. His hotels also used automated systems to screen applications. People without degrees, previous job titles, or experience at recognized companies were often rejected before a hiring manager ever saw their names. Everyone demands experience, Annie said, but no one wants to be the first person to give me a chance to earn it. Richard lowered the sandwich. Her words reminded him of himself many years earlier. Back then, he had no hotels, no driver, and no one knew the name Richard Bennett. He had once stood behind a small restaurant wearing a shirt borrowed from his cousin. He had no experience, no references, and barely enough money for the bus ride home. An older manager had allowed him to wash dishes for one evening. At the end of the shift, the man handed Richard a clean apron and told him to return the next morning. Richard's life had begun with that simple yes. "What do you need the job to pay for?" he asked. Annie turned the sandwich wrapper over in her hands and looked away. "Mostly rent. My family is behind." She paused before adding, "There are also the electric bill, the water bill, and groceries. Those bills still arrive whether I find a job today or not." "Do you live alone?" "I live with my family." Annie offered no further explanation, and Richard did not press her. He understood that some hardships were difficult to share with someone she had only just met, especially when she was still trying to hold on to the last of her dignity. "How far behind is your family on the rent?" Annie's hand stopped moving. She turned toward him, her expression both guarded and hurt. "I'm not asking you for money." "I know. Do you really?" The question caught Richard off guard. He had met too many people who began with a story about hardship and ended by naming an amount. Over time, he had come to assume that anyone who mentioned rent or unpaid bills was waiting for him to reach for his wallet. But Annie had no idea who he was. She had given him the larger half of her sandwich before she even knew his name. She was hungry, exhausted, and possibly unable to pay her rent, yet she still believed that a stranger needed the food more than she did. Richard nodded. "Yes, I believe you." Annie checked the old watch on her wrist and quickly stood. "I have to go. There's a diner near State Street accepting applications until 7. Richard looked at the shoes that had rubbed her heels raw. "You've been walking all day, but I still don't have a job. You could rest tonight and try again tomorrow." Annie bent down to pick up her canvas bag. "The rent will still be due tomorrow." Her answer was quiet, but it left Richard with nothing more to say. Annie threw the sandwich wrapper into a nearby trash can, then returned and placed the bag over her shoulder. The strap was frayed, and she had to adjust it twice to keep it from slipping. Richard watched her. "What's your name?" "Annie Brooks." "I'm Richard." "It's nice to meet you, Richard." She held out her hand. It was small, and her fingertips were slightly rough from all the odd jobs she had done. Richard shook it. Annie gave him a tired but sincere smile. "Good luck finding a job." Richard looked at the remaining sandwich in his hand. "Thank you again." Annie gave a quiet laugh. "Just remember me when you become rich someday." She was only joking. As far as she knew, Richard was simply a tired, middle-aged man, sitting alone in a park during working hours. Richard smiled. "I'll remember." Annie turned and walked away. Her feet hurt, and the canvas bag rubbed against her shoulder, but she still moved quickly, afraid the diner would stop accepting applications before she arrived. Richard watched her thin figure moving down the path. He let her walk several yards before calling out, "Annie." She stopped and turned around. Richard rose from the bench. "May I have your phone number?" The smile disappeared from Annie's face. She pulled the bag strap closer to her body, and caution immediately entered her eyes. Richard noticed her reaction and quickly explained, "I may know a place that needs someone willing to learn. I can't promise anything, but they might give you an interview." Annie studied him for a long moment, trying to decide whether she could trust the offer. Finally, she returned to the bench. She searched through her old bag but could not find a clean sheet of paper. After a moment, she pulled out a crumpled pharmacy receipt, smoothed it against her knee, and wrote her name and phone number on the back. Her pen was nearly out of ink. Annie had to trace over several numbers before they became clear. Before handing the receipt to Richard, she bent down and added one more line beneath them. "I learn fast." Richard accepted the old receipt. He folded it neatly and placed it carefully inside his wallet. Annie put the bag back over her shoulder and continued toward State Street. She did not know who Richard Bennett was, nor did she know how many doors the man who had just eaten half her sandwich could open. All she knew was that she had less than an hour to reach the final diner before it stopped accepting applications. Richard sat down on the bench again. In one hand, he held the small piece of paper bearing Annie's handwriting. In the other, he held the last bite of the sandwich she had shared with him. Richard remained on the park bench until Annie's figure disappeared beyond the last row of trees. The evening crowd continued streaming past him, but his gaze stayed fixed on the path she had taken. The receipt rested between his fingers. It was thin, creased at one corner, and fragile enough to tear with the slightest pull. Yet at that moment, it felt heavier in his hand than the stack of financial reports waiting on his desk. A phone number had been written in blue ink on the back. The handwriting was small and neat, though several strokes had pressed deeply into the paper because Annie had balanced the receipt on her knee while writing. Beneath the number, she had added one sentence. "I learn very quickly." Richard studied those words for several more seconds before taking out his phone and calling Eleanor Price. She answered on the first ring. "Mr. Bennett, you finally decided to call. Where are you?" "Charles has called me 6 times. Richard looked at the piece of sandwich Annie had left beside him in its wrapper. "Let him call a 7th. Eleanor paused. "That does not sound like you." Richard closed his fingers around the receipt. "Maybe that is the problem. Did something happen? I need you to check a job application." "Whose?" "Annie Brooks. 18 years old. She visited several hotels downtown today. Start with Bennett Grand." The sound of Eleanor typing came through the phone. Richard waited. The park continued moving around him. A father pulled his son out of the path of an approaching bicycle. A vendor on the corner lowered the metal shutter on his food cart. An elderly couple walked slowly past, each holding a cup of steaming coffee. Annie had left with an empty paper bag. Richard looked down at the piece of sandwich in his hand. She had been searching for work since morning, with no idea whether she would have enough money to buy more food that evening. Yet she had still broken her only dinner in half and shared it with a stranger. "I found her," Eleanor said. Richard immediately sat straighter. "She applied? At 11:43 this morning. Guest services assistant. And the result?" Eleanor did not answer immediately. Richard heard her keyboard fall silent. The system automatically rejected her application. Why? No college degree. No experience in the hospitality industry. No professional references. Richard stared straight ahead. "That is an entry-level position." "I know. Did any employee actually read her application?" "The records show no manual review, so no one read it." "That is correct." Richard pressed his thumb against the edge of the receipt. The corner curled beneath the pressure. "How long did the system take to reject her?" Eleanor checked again. 38 seconds. Richard said nothing. 38 seconds. Annie had spent the entire day walking through crowded streets, waiting outside offices, and completing application after application with tired hands. Before every meeting with a manager, she had smoothed her worn shirt, fixed her hair, and forced herself to smile as though the previous rejection had never happened. She had written the same information over and over. Her name, her address, her education, her employment history, her references. Every time she faced those empty boxes, she had been forced to confront everything she did not have. Yet, she had still told herself that this time might be different. Richard's company had needed only 38 seconds to decide that she was not worth having a real person look at her application. "Who approved that screening process?" Richard asked. "Human Resources created the criteria. Operations approved them." "Charles?" His office signed the final policy. Richard rose abruptly. The unfinished piece of sandwich was still on the bench. He picked it up, noticed the faint impression Annie's fingers had left on the wrapper, and carefully folded the paper around it. "Schedule Annie for an interview tomorrow morning." "I can do that immediately." "A real interview, Eleanor." Richard began walking slowly along the path, his voice becoming firmer. No promises in advance. No ceremonial meeting where everyone has already decided to hire her because I asked. I want her evaluated on what she can do. I understand. Choose managers who genuinely understand the job. Have them ask practical questions. Give her a skills assessment if necessary. And do not mention my name before she arrives. Eleanor's voice softened. Who is she? Richard stopped walking. He looked back at the bench, now empty on one side. She thought I was unemployed. What? She saw me sitting alone in the park, looking exhausted and not eating anything. She asked whether I was looking for work, too. Eleanor let out a quiet breath. And then, she shared her dinner with me. There was no response from the other end for several seconds. Are you serious? She had one sandwich after spending the entire day searching for a job. She broke it in half and gave me the larger piece. Richard looked at the food in his hand. She is worried about paying rent. She also has to cover her younger brother's school fees. But she still looked at me and saw someone who needed help more than she did. And now you want to hire her? No, Richard answered immediately. I want us to do what Bennett Grand claims to do in every piece of recruitment material we publish. Meet the applicant, listen to her, evaluate her abilities, then make a decision. That sounds reasonable. Something that reasonable should never have become the exception. Another call appeared on his screen. Charles Whitmore. Richard looked at the name and declined the call. At the same time, on the other side of downtown, Annie stopped outside a diner with only 11 minutes remaining before 7 in the evening. Her legs ached after walking all day. The backs of her shoes had rubbed the skin above her heels until every step burned. The strap of her bag had left a red line across her shoulder. But when she saw the paper sign taped inside the window, she immediately straightened. Now hiring for the evening shift. Annie studied her reflection in the glass. Her shirt was wrinkled at the elbows. Her hair was no longer as neat as it had been that morning. Exhaustion showed across her face, and repeated rejection had taken some of the hope from her eyes. She smoothed her shirt with both hands, adjusted her collar, and forced a small smile onto her lips. One more time, she whispered to herself. Annie pushed open the door. The smell of coffee, grilled onions, and frying oil surrounded her immediately. At a table near the entrance, several customers were eating hamburgers and French fries. As Annie passed them, her empty stomach cramped. She pressed one hand lightly against it and walked faster so no one would notice. A waitress carrying 2 plates from the kitchen nodded toward the counter. The manager's in the back. Are you here to apply? Yes, ma'am. Take an application from the counter. He'll come out in a minute. Thank you. Annie sat on the last stool at the counter. Another job application waited in front of her. Name, address, education, experience, references. She held the pen but did not begin writing immediately. Each empty box reminded her that employers always asked about the things life had never given her a chance to earn. Annie was only 18. Her mother was dead. Her father no longer contacted them. She had to find a way to keep their small apartment so she and her younger brother would not be separated. He was still in school. He still needed books, lunch money, and the tuition balance that had not yet been paid. Annie did not have 4 years of college to prove that she knew how to work hard. All she had were mornings when she woke before her brother, bills divided into smaller amounts, and dinners when she claimed not to be hungry so he could have the food that remained. She drew a deep breath and began writing. In the experience section, Annie listed the times she had served meals at church functions and community dinners. Under the question asking when she could begin, she wrote in capital letters. Immediately, she carried the application to the manager, who was counting money near the register. He took it, skimmed the first page, and turned it over. No restaurant experience? Not official experience. What does that mean? I have served food at church events and community dinners. I know how to take orders, clear tables, carry trays, restock supplies, and handle cash. Have you ever used a register? Not the kind you use here, but I can learn. The manager placed the application on the counter. We need someone who can start without taking time to train. I can start tonight. He looked up at her. Annie immediately continued. You do not have to put me near customers. I can wash trays, wipe tables, take out the trash, or restock napkins. Let me work 1 shift. If I cannot keep up, you never have to call me back. The manager checked the clock on the wall. I'm sure you're a good young woman, but I need someone with experience. Annie tightened her grip on the strap of her bag, her fingernails pressed deeply into the worn fabric. She fought to keep her voice from breaking. How am I supposed to get experience if no one will let me begin? The man watched her for a moment, then slid her application beneath the counter. That is not a problem I can solve tonight. Annie watched the paper disappear. It was the 15th rejection she had received that day. She knew she should thank him and leave, but her eyes drifted toward the hiring sign in the window. Will you call me? If something suitable becomes available, but the sign outside says you need someone for the evening shift. The manager's expression hardened. I have other applicants. Annie understood. The position was not gone. The opportunity simply was not meant for her. She lowered her head slightly. Thank you for your time. Annie turned away before the manager could see the redness gathering in her eyes. She stepped onto the sidewalk. The door closed behind her, trapping the smell of warm food inside. The last daylight had faded from the buildings. Storefronts began turning on their lights. People passed Annie carrying bags of takeout food, cold drinks, and conversations about what they planned to eat that night. Annie stood close to the window and lowered her head, pretending to check her phone. She did not want to cry. She had promised her younger brother that she would bring home good news that evening. Now she did not know what she would say when she walked through their door with empty hands. Her stomach hurt so badly that she pressed a hand beneath her ribs. She had already eaten the remaining half of the sandwich, but it had not been enough after an entire day of walking. Even so, she did not regret sharing it with the man in the park. He had looked as though one more terrible hour might cause him to collapse. Annie understood that feeling. Some people were hungry because they had no money to buy food. Others had everything they could possibly own, yet were so exhausted inside that they no longer remembered what they were struggling for. She did not know what kind of pain the man had been carrying. She only knew that when she saw him, she could not pretend she had not. Annie opened the bus schedule on her phone. The battery had dropped to 4%. Her transit card held enough value for only one ride. If she used the nearest stop, she would have to transfer and would not have enough money for the final bus. She put the phone away, pulled the strap of her bag higher onto her shoulder, and began walking toward the more distant stop. Every step sent a sharp pain through the blisters behind her heels. She kept walking. At that same moment, Richard entered Bennett Grand through the employee entrance instead of the main lobby. Charles Whitmore was waiting near the security desk. The moment he saw Richard, he approached him. You finally decided to appear. Where have you been? The board expects an answer tonight. Richard scanned his access card. They can wait until tomorrow. They have already waited 3 weeks. They are asking me to eliminate 3,000 jobs. I have the right to think before I sign anything. Charles followed closely as Richard walked toward the elevators. We are not eliminating jobs. We are reducing expenses to protect the company. Richard pressed the elevator button. Protecting the company from the people who keep it running? Protecting the company from costs we can no longer afford. The elevator doors opened. Richard stepped inside. Charles followed and pressed the button for the executive floor. As the doors closed, Richard watched the numbers climb on the display. Tell me something. Charles exhaled, clearly unwilling to change the subject. What? Why does an entry-level guest services position require a college degree? Charles turned toward him. What? You heard me. That depends on the hotel. Bennett Grand. Richard looked directly at him. Guest services assistant. Charles adjusted his cuff. A college degree shows that an applicant has discipline. Does it teach someone how to listen to an angry guest? It shows us that the applicant completed a long-term goal. What about people who cannot afford 4 years of college? Charles frowned. We are not a charity, Richard. No. Richard stepped closer. We are a hotel. We need people who know how to listen, solve problems, treat guests with respect, and learn the job. Since when did a degree become the only acceptable proof of those abilities? Charles studied him more closely. Where's this coming from? Our system rejected an applicant this morning. Our system rejects applicants every day. It rejected her in 38 seconds. That happens to thousands of people. Richard turned fully toward Charles. Exactly. Charles hesitated. The elevator reached the executive floor. The doors opened, and Charles stepped out first. You cannot tear apart the entire hiring policy because one applicant failed to meet the requirements. Richard stepped out but stopped just beyond the elevator. I did not say I was tearing apart the policy. Then what are you doing? I am wondering how many capable people we have never met. Richard took the receipt from his pocket. How many people have walked through the doors of this hotel ready to work and willing to learn, only to be rejected by a machine because their lives had not yet filled every box on an application? Charles crossed his arms. You are becoming emotional over one individual case. I am seeing the consequences of a system we approved without ever having to stand on the side being rejected by it. The last of Charles's patience began to crack. You are exhausted. Go home. Get some sleep. We will continue this discussion after tomorrow's board vote. Richard looked at the sentence on the receipt. I learned very quickly. The girl had not written it to impress anyone. She had written it because it was almost the only thing she could offer as proof of her value. Richard folded the receipt. Postpone the vote. Charles let out a brief laugh. The board will not accept that. They do not have to accept it immediately. They simply have to refrain from voting. You are putting a billion-dollar expansion at risk because of a few hiring requirements. No. Richard stepped closer to Charles. I am delaying the expansion until I understand what we are expanding. Charles stared at him. Richard continued. A company that only knows how to build more hotels while treating employees like numbers that can be erased? He pointed toward the lobby below. Or a company that understands every clean room, every guest who receives help, and every phone call that gets answered depends on the people the board is preparing to remove from the payroll? Charles's expression changed. His impatience disappeared, replaced by calculation. This is not only about hiring policy. Richard did not deny it. Charles moved closer. What happened in that park? Yes. Richard met his eyes. An 18-year-old girl spent the entire day searching for work. She has almost no money left. She is afraid of losing her home, and she has to pay her younger brother's school fees. He tightened his grip on the receipt. She had only one sandwich for dinner. Charles said nothing, but when she saw me sitting alone, she broke it in half and gave me the larger piece. Richard stopped for a moment, his voice catching in his throat. She thought I was unemployed. She did not know my name. She did not know I could help her. She did not know what company I ran. She helped me for one reason. She thought I was hungry. Charles looked at the paper in Richard's hand. And what did our company do? Richard asked the question even though he already knew the answer. We gave her 38 seconds. If Annie's kindness touched your heart, please like this video, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more moving stories like this one. Charles shook his head slightly. You cannot save everyone. I never said I could. Richard placed the receipt inside his jacket pocket. But I can stop pretending that we do not see them. He walked toward his office, leaving Charles beside the elevator. Eleanor was waiting inside. Annie's application lay on Richard's desk. It was only 2 pages long, but the corners had begun to curl because she had carried it with her all day. In the section asking where she had applied, Annie had listed Bennett Grand and 8 other companies. Eleanor had checked each one and written the result beside it. Rejected. No interview. Rejected. No interview. Rejected. No interview. 9 names. 9 closed doors. Near the bottom of the page, the employment history section was almost empty. Not because Annie had never worked. She had cared for her younger brother, calculated every bill, cooked, cleaned, helped serve community meals at church, and found ways to survive days when no adult stood behind her to offer protection. None of those responsibilities fit into the boxes printed on the application. Richard read the skills she had listed. Reliable, quick learner, good with people, available immediately. On the final line, Annie had added, willing to work any shift as long as I can take my brother to school in the morning. Richard's eyes remained on that sentence. Eleanor stood across the desk. The interview panel will be ready at 10 tomorrow morning. Has anyone called her? Not yet. I thought you wanted to review the application first. Richard closed the file. No more reviews tonight. Eleanor looked surprised. You do not want to read the Human Resources report? No. He placed his palm over Annie's application. Too many people have already judged her without a single one of them agreeing to meet her. Call her first thing tomorrow morning. I will. Eleanor glanced toward the door Charles had passed earlier. And Charles? He thinks this is about one applicant. Isn't it? Richard walked to the glass wall of his office. From the upper floor, he looked down at the hotel lobby. A front desk employee leaned forward to give directions to a family. A bellman pushed a luggage cart through the revolving doors. A female employee knelt to pick up a toy a child had dropped. Farther away, members of the housekeeping staff carried fresh towels toward the service elevator. They performed thousands of tasks every day. Most of those tasks never appeared in a board report. But if those employees stopped, Bennett Grand would stop with them. Richard placed one hand against the glass. No. He remembered Annie standing beside the park bench. Her shoes worn. Her bag nearly empty. Yet still holding out half a sandwich to him. Annie is simply the first person who made me willing to look. Annie's phone rings at 8:06 the next morning while she is standing at the kitchen counter, spreading peanut butter across the last 2 slices of bread in the apartment. The number is unfamiliar. She almost lets it go to voicemail. Most unknown calls are payment reminders, automated advertisements, or employers sending recorded rejection messages. Then she remembers the receipt she gave Richard. She wipes her hand on a dish towel and answers. Hello? May I speak with Miss Annie Brooks? This is Annie. My name is Eleanor Price. I'm calling from Bennett Hospitality Group regarding an application you submitted yesterday. Annie stops moving. She submitted so many forms that the details have begun to blend together. Which position? Guest Services Assistant at Bennett Grand Chicago. Annie remembers the hotel. The woman at the front desk directed her to a computer near the employee entrance. Annie spent 20 minutes completing the application, only to receive a rejection before she reached the next block. I already got an email saying I wasn't qualified. I'm aware of that. Annie grips the edge of the counter. Then why are you calling? We would like to invite you to an interview at 10 this morning. She looks at the clock above the stove. Less than 2 hours. Is this a real interview? Yes, ma'am. Not one of those meetings where someone tells me to apply online again? No, you've already applied. 3 managers will meet with you and ask questions related to the position. Annie thinks of Richard sitting in the park with his sleeves rolled up and half her sandwich in his hand. Did a man named Richard speak to you? Eleanor pauses. Mr. Bennett asked us to review your application, so this is because of him. He asked that you receive an interview. He did not ask us to give you a job. The distinction matters, though Annie is not sure whether it makes her feel better. Who is Mr. Bennett? Eleanor's answer is calm. That is something he should explain himself. Annie pulls the phone away and checks the number again. The area code is local. The call sounds professional. Still, the situation makes little sense. What should I bring? A photo ID and any information you believe shows what you can do. You don't need to purchase anything or pay a fee. I don't have business clothes. Wear something clean that allows you to feel confident. Annie looks toward the narrow closet beside the front door. One white shirt hangs inside, freshly washed but not ironed. I can be there. We'll expect you at 10. Please use the main entrance and ask for me at the front desk. Miss Price? Yes? Why did you call me Miss Brooks? Eleanor sounds surprised by the question. Because that's your name. Annie lowers her voice. Most places call me Annie before they've even met me. Then perhaps they should learn some manners. The response brings a brief smile to Annie's face. Thank you, she says. Come prepared, Miss Brooks. The interview will be fair, but it will not be easy. That's all I'm asking for. When the call ends, Annie remains beside the counter with the phone pressed against her palm. Yesterday, she could not persuade anyone to spend 5 minutes with her. Now a major hotel has changed its mind overnight because a tired stranger made one call. She should feel lucky. Instead, she feels exposed. What if the managers already know Richard sent her? What if they treat her like a favor they have been ordered to complete? What if she gets the job and every person in the building believes she did not earn it? Her phone vibrates with a low battery warning. Annie plugs it in, fills the iron with water, and lays the white shirt across the kitchen table. The collar is slightly faded. One cuff has a loose thread. She clips it with scissors, presses each sleeve, then checks her shoes. The black flats are worn near the heels but still presentable after she wipes them with a damp cloth. On the table sits a stack of rejection emails she printed at the public library. Annie considers throwing them away. Instead, she places them inside a folder along with her high school transcript, a certificate from a community food service course, and a letter from the director of a neighborhood center where she volunteers. None of it is formal employment. It is still work. At 8:48, she leaves the apartment carrying the folder and enough bus fare for the round trip. The peanut butter sandwich stays wrapped in her bag. She has no appetite. The bus is crowded with workers heading downtown. Annie stands near the rear door, holding the metal rail while reviewing possible questions in her head. Tell us about yourself. Why do you want to work here? What experience do you have? That last one follows her everywhere. She decides she will not apologize for the blank spaces on her application. She will tell them what she knows, what she can do, and how quickly she can learn. If that is not enough, she will leave with her dignity intact. Bennett Grand rises above the avenue in stone and glass. Uniformed attendants open car doors beneath a wide entrance canopy. Guests move through the revolving doors with rolling luggage and garment bags. Annie stops across the street. The building looks different when she is not arriving to ask whether anyone might speak with her. Today, someone is expecting her. She checks the time. 9:34. After crossing the street, she steps through the main entrance. The lobby floor reflects the chandeliers overhead. Fresh flowers stand on a table near the center, and soft piano music plays beneath the sound of conversations and luggage wheels. A front desk agent smiles. "Good morning. How may I help you? I'm here to see Miss Eleanor Price. My name is Annie Brooks." The agent checks the computer. "Yes, Miss Brooks. She's expecting you." There it is again. Her name spoken as if it deserves space. A woman with silver-streaked hair approaches from the elevators. She wears a navy suit and carries a leather folder. Her posture is straight, but her expression is kind. "Miss Brooks?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm Eleanor Price." They shake hands. "Thank you for coming on short notice," Eleanor says. "Thank you for calling." Eleanor studies Annie for a moment, noticing the folder held tightly against her side. "Nervous?" "A little. That usually means the opportunity matters." They enter the elevator. Eleanor presses the button for the executive floor. Annie watches the numbers rise. "Is my interview up there?" "Part of it." The elevator doors open onto a quiet hallway lined with framed photographs of hotels from across the country. Eleanor leads her toward a set of dark wooden doors. Before opening them, she turns to Annie. "Everyone in this office knows how you arrived here. What happens next depends on what you do after you walk through that door." Annie adjusts her grip on the folder. "That's fair." Eleanor opens the door. Annie steps forward, ready to meet the people who will decide whether she deserves her first chance. Annie stepped through the doorway and stopped. Richard stood near the windows in a charcoal suit, one hand resting beside a closed folder. His shirt was crisp, his tie perfectly set, and the exhaustion she had noticed in the park was harder to see beneath the authority he carried here. Behind him, silver letters were fixed to the wall. Richard Bennett, founder and chairman. Annie looked from the name to the man she had shared a sandwich with less than 24 hours earlier. "You're Richard Bennett." He gave a small nod. "I am." "The Richard Bennett?" "I'm afraid so." She tightened her grip on the folder. Heat rose into her face as she remembered asking whether he was unemployed, offering him food, and wishing him luck finding work. "You let me think you didn't have a job. I told you my name. You left out the part where it was written on half the hotels in Chicago. That would have changed the conversation. It certainly changes this one." Her voice remained controlled, but the strain showed. Yesterday, Richard had seemed like the first stranger in weeks who understood what it felt like to have nowhere useful to go. Now she was standing in his executive office, while people waited to judge whether she deserved a place far below him. Richard moved away from the window but kept a respectful distance. "I didn't bring you here to embarrass you." "Then why am I here?" "Because my company rejected your application in 38 seconds. Annie's expression shifted. "You checked?" "Yes. And then you told them to call me." "I told them to interview you." "That sounds like the same thing when the request comes from the owner." Richard accepted the criticism without defending himself. "You're right. My name opened the door. Then how am I supposed to know anything after that is real?" The question reached him because he had asked himself the same thing the night before. "You shouldn't take my word for it," he said. "You should meet the interview panel, answer their questions, let them evaluate you." "I won't be in the room, and if they don't want me, then they will explain why, based on the job, not your lack of a degree that the position doesn't require, not an empty employment history no one gave you a chance to fill." Annie glanced toward Eleanor. "Did he tell you to hire me?" "No," Eleanor replied. "He told us to reconsider an application our system dismissed before a person read it." "Would I be standing here without him?" "No," Eleanor said. "But you are standing here. What you do next is yours." The honesty loosened something in Annie's chest. Her eyes became wet, though she did not turn away or allow the emotion to take control. "I spent all day hearing no," she said. "Then this morning, someone calls me Miss Brooks and tells me to come to one of the biggest hotels in the city. I thought maybe yesterday finally counted for something. It did, Richard said. Because I gave you food? Because you saw a tired man and treated him with dignity before you knew whether he could do anything for you. That doesn't mean I can work in a hotel. No. That's what the interview is for. Annie studied him, searching for the catch. I won't take a favor dressed like a job. Richard nodded. Then don't. She wiped one eye with the side of her finger and looked at Eleanor. Where's the interview? Eleanor opened the second door. Right this way. Richard remained behind as Annie entered a conference room where two hotel managers waited beside a small round table. One was Maria Alvarez, Director of Guest Services. The other was David Reynolds, the hotel's training manager. They introduced themselves, offered her water, and explained the position. Annie placed her folder on the table and sat with both feet planted on the floor. Maria began. Tell us about a time you had to calm someone who was upset. Annie thought for a moment. At a community dinner, two people arrived after the kitchen had almost run out of food. One of them got angry because he thought we were refusing to serve him. What did you do? I let him finish talking. You didn't explain the shortage. Not at first. He wasn't ready to hear an explanation. He wanted to know somebody had noticed he was there. David wrote something on his pad. What happened next? I checked what we had left, asked the kitchen to divide 2 meals differently, and found enough for both of them. Did that solve everything? No. He was still embarrassed. So I didn't make a big announcement about fixing it. I brought the plates over and asked whether they needed anything else. Maria continued. What would you do if a guest asked a question and you didn't know the answer? I'd tell them I was going to find someone who did. You wouldn't guess? No, ma'am. Guessing makes the employee feel useful for 10 seconds and creates a bigger problem afterward. David almost smiled. What if the guest became impatient? I'd give them a time estimate and come back before that time, even if I was still working on it. The questions grew harder. They asked how she would prioritize several requests, how she would respond to criticism, and what she would do if a coworker made a mistake. Annie did not answer perfectly. She admitted when she lacked technical knowledge. She explained that she had never used hotel reservation software and would need instruction. When David asked why they should invest time in training her, she paused before answering. Because I won't confuse being new with being incapable. Show me how to do the work, and I'll practice until I can do it right. Correct me when I'm wrong, and I won't make you correct me twice for the same thing. The interview lasted 45 minutes. When it ended, Annie waited near the windows while the panel reviewed their notes. Richard was nowhere nearby, which made the waiting easier. Whatever happened next would come from the people who had questioned her. Maria returned with Eleanor. Miss Brooks, we'd like to offer you a place in our 90-day paid guest services training program. Annie held still. Maria continued. You'll receive the standard starting wage and benefits available to trainees. You'll complete safety training, customer service instruction, and rotations through several departments. You'll be evaluated under the same requirements as the rest of the group. This is a real job? It is. And I can lose it if I don't meet the standards? Yes. A smile appeared on Annie's face before she could stop it. She looked down at the folder that had carried more rejections than opportunities. When do I start? Monday at 8. Richard entered only after the offer had been made. Annie turned toward him, still trying to absorb what had happened. Congratulations, he said. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. You called me Richard yesterday. Yesterday I thought you were unemployed. That seemed to make me easier to talk to. It did. Before Richard could answer, another man entered. Charles Whitmore wore a dark blue suit and carried a tablet under one arm. His attention moved from Richard to Annie, and then to the offer letter on the table. So this is the applicant from the park. Annie's smile faded. Charles turned to Richard. Are we hiring by qualification or by coincidence now? Richard's expression hardened. She completed the interview. She has no experience. Maria answered before Richard could. That is why she is entering a training program. Charles looked at Annie. This company has standards. Miss Brooks. I hope so, Annie replied. I came here to meet them. For a moment, Charles seemed surprised that she had answered. Then he smiled without warmth. Make certain she receives the same evaluation as everyone else. Richard met his eyes. That was always the plan. Charles left without offering congratulations. Eleanor handed Annie a temporary badge. Her name appeared above the words Guest Services Trainee. Annie ran her thumb along the edge of the card. The door had opened, but Charles had made one thing clear before she had worked a single shift. Some people inside Bennett Grand were already waiting for her to prove she did not deserve it. Monday morning arrived before Annie felt ready for it. She reached Bennett Grand at 7:32, 28 minutes early, wearing the white shirt she had pressed the night before and the black flats she had cleaned twice. Her temporary badge was clipped above her left pocket. She checked it once before entering through the employee entrance. Inside, the hotel looked different from the side guests never saw. The polished lobby gave way to narrow service hallways, supply rooms, break areas, and offices filled with schedules, radios, and half-finished cups of coffee. Employees moved with purpose, greeting one another while checking watches and task lists. A security guard behind the desk held out his hand. "Badge, please." Annie showed him the card. He examined it, then looked at her. "First day?" "Yes, sir. Training room is down the hall. Second door on the right. You've got time." "Thank you." "You're welcome, Miss Brooks." Hearing her name spoken with respect still surprised her. 7 other trainees were already seated when she entered the room. Most appeared older than Annie. 2 had worked in restaurants. 1 had spent 3 years at another hotel. Another had completed a hospitality program at a community college. Annie chose a seat near the middle and placed her notebook on the table. The woman beside her glanced at the temporary badge. "You're the one from the park." Annie turned. "Excuse me?" The woman Mr. Bennett met outside somewhere. She smiled as though sharing harmless gossip. "People have been talking. My name is Annie. I'm Melissa." She tapped a pen against her folder. "I just mean you must have made quite an impression." Annie opened her notebook. "I shared a sandwich." Melissa laughed. "That must have been some sandwich." Before Annie could answer, David Reynolds entered and began orientation. He reviewed attendance, uniforms, guest privacy, emergency procedures, and the standards expected during the 90-day program. Trainees would rotate through the front desk. Guest services, housekeeping coordination, banquet support, and inventory. Every 2 weeks, supervisors would submit written evaluations. "This program is paid," David said, "but it is not a guarantee of permanent employment. You will make mistakes. We expect that. What matters is whether you listen, correct them, and improve." Annie wrote down every word. Their first lesson covered telephone procedures. Each trainee practiced answering calls, placing guests on hold, and transferring requests to the proper department. Annie did well until she sent a maintenance request to room service. David ended the practice call. "What happened?" "I pressed 6 instead of 9. "And what do you do now?" "Learn the extension before the next call." "Good. Write them down until you know them." Annie copied the department list onto the first page of her notebook. Later that morning, she shadowed Maria Alvarez at the front desk. Maria showed her how to confirm reservations, protect account information, and speak with guests who arrived before their rooms were ready. "Never promise a time unless the system supports it," Maria said. "A guess may calm someone for 5 minutes, but it creates a second complaint when the promise fails." Annie nodded. "Give them the truth and something useful they can do while they wait." Exactly. Her first direct interaction came before lunch. A businessman approached the desk and asked where he could print a document. Annie knew there was a business center but could not remember which floor. She almost pointed toward the elevators. Instead, she turned to Maria. "May I confirm the location?" "3rd floor, near the conference rooms." Annie faced the guest again. "The business center is on the 3rd floor beside the conference rooms. The elevators are to your left." The man thanked her and walked away. Maria made a note on Annie's evaluation sheet. "Did I do something wrong?" Annie asked. "No. You checked instead of guessing." At noon, the trainees ate in the employee cafeteria. Annie chose soup, a turkey sandwich, and an apple, then paused when she saw the amount deducted from her meal allowance. Melissa noticed. "It's covered during training," she said. "I know. I'm just checking." "You check everything." "I have to." Across the cafeteria, 2 employees were speaking quietly near the coffee machine. Annie could not hear every word, but she caught her name and Mr. Bennett's. One of them said, "Some people submit resumes. Some people share sandwiches." The other laughed. Annie sat down and unwrapped her lunch without responding. Melissa looked uncomfortable. Ignore them. That usually makes people think they can keep going. What are you going to do? Work. The afternoon rotation took Annie to the supply department, where she counted welcome kits and organized boxes of toiletries. The supervisor gave her a printed list, then left to handle a delivery problem. Annie found that the numbers on the list did not match the shelves. Instead of changing the total to make the paperwork fit, she counted again and marked the difference. When the supervisor returned, he frowned at the sheet. You're saying we're short 24 shaving kits? I'm saying the shelf has 24 fewer than the list. Most trainees would assume they counted wrong. I did assume that, so I counted 3 times. He checked the boxes himself and found that a shipment had been entered twice. You saved us from reporting stock we don't have, he said. I just counted what was there. That's more useful than counting what someone expected to see. Near the end of her shift, Annie was asked to guide a guest to a reunion dinner. The man walked slowly and carried a small travel bag. The ballroom is on the 2nd floor, Annie said. I can take you there. You can point. I'm not helpless. I know, sir. I'm heading that way. He gave her a doubtful look, then fell into step beside her. During the walk, he explained that he was meeting former army friends. Several had not seen one another in decades. Annie listened without interrupting and slowed her pace to match his. At the ballroom entrance, the man looked at her badge. Thank you, Miss Brooks. You're welcome, sir. I hope you have a good evening. He nodded toward the hallway behind them. Most people tell an old man where to go. You walked with me. Annie carried that sentence back to the training room. David was collecting the day's notebooks. How was your first shift? I transferred a call to the wrong department. Anything else? I found a supply error, learned where the business center is, and walked a guest to his dinner. So you made one mistake and did 3 things correctly. I'll still remember the mistake first. That can help, as long as you don't let it hide everything else. After the trainees left, Annie remained long enough to copy the hotel extensions onto a small card. She planned to study them during the bus ride home. As she reached the employee exit, Charles Whitmore approached with a department manager. He stopped when he saw her. Miss Brooks, how was your first day? I learned a lot. Learning is the easy part. Consistency is what matters. Yes, sir. He looked at the notebook in her hand. You'll rotate through every department. No shortened schedule, no special assignments, no exceptions. I didn't ask for any. Charles gave a polite smile. Good. Then we understand each other. Annie left without offering him the reaction he appeared to expect. Upstairs, Charles entered Richard's office without an appointment. She completed her first day, he said. Richard looked up from a report. So did several other trainees. None of them arrived through your personal intervention. She passed the interview. That won't stop people from questioning why she is here. Then judge her work. I intend to. Charles placed a revised training schedule on the desk. Annie's name appeared in more departments and on more demanding shifts than the other trainees. Richard read it once, then looked at him. This is heavier than the standard rotation. You said no special treatment. I said fair treatment. Charles picked up the schedule. If she has the ability you believe she has, the work will show it. After he left, Richard called Eleanor and handed her the document. Keep a copy of every version of Annie's schedule. You think Charles is setting her up? I think he wants her to fail without leaving fingerprints. Eleanor studied the assignments. Are you going to stop him? Not yet. That carries a risk. I know. Richard looked through the glass wall toward the elevators Annie had used earlier. She asked for the chance to prove herself. I need to make sure the test is real. On the bus home, Annie held her new badge in one hand and studied hotel extensions with the other. She did not know that Charles had already expanded her workload. She only knew she had a place to return to the next morning, and she intended to arrive early again. By the end of Annie's 3rd week at Bennett Grand, she could answer the hotel phone without checking the extension card taped inside her notebook. She knew which elevator reached the conference floors fastest, which guests preferred printed directions, and which supervisors expected every supply count twice. Charles kept adding difficult assignments to her schedule. Annie moved from early morning inventory to afternoon guest services, then stayed late to help prepare banquet rooms. She never complained, but the long days showed in the way she rubbed her feet while waiting for the bus. On Friday, her first paycheck arrived through direct deposit. Annie checked the amount 3 times on her phone before leaving the employee cafeteria. Taxes and benefit deductions had taken more than she expected, but the number was real. It was money she had earned by arriving early, learning the work, and staying calm when someone spoke to her, as though she did not deserve the uniform. That evening, she stopped at a grocery store near her apartment. She bought eggs, milk, bread, rice, vegetables, a roasted chicken, and a small apple pie, marked down for quick sale. She stood near the register calculating the total in her head before placing a box of frozen waffles back on the shelf. Marcus noticed the grocery bags as soon as she entered. "Did you rob a bank?" Annie set them on the kitchen counter. "I got paid." "All that from one paycheck?" "No. Some of this came from coupons and patience." Marcus opened one bag and found the chicken. "This is a celebration." "It's dinner. It has seasoning. That makes it a celebration." Annie laughed and pushed a stack of mail away from the center of the table. One envelope contained the latest rent notice. Another came from Marcus's school with the remaining tuition balance printed in bold near the bottom. She placed part of her paycheck into separate envelopes and wrote on each one: rent, school, bus fare, groceries, emergency. Marcus watched her divide the money. "You don't have much left." "I have enough." "For what?" "For getting to work so they can pay me again." He opened the school envelope and checked the amount. "You put too much in here." "No, I didn't. You need new shoes." "My shoes still work. They make a sound every time you walk. That helps people know I'm coming." "Annie." "Marcus." He gave her the same disapproving expression she often gave him. "I can leave the program," he said. "The regular school is free." Annie stopped writing. "You are not leaving. It would save money. You like that program. I like eating too. We have food. For now." Annie placed the pen down. She knew he was trying to help, but the offer carried more fear than generosity. He had begun checking the refrigerator before asking for anything. He kept old notebooks because new ones cost money. He had stopped mentioning a science kit required for an upcoming project. She reached across the table and tapped the school envelope. "This is why I took the job. You took the job because Richard Bennett felt sorry for you." The sentence came out faster than Marcus intended. Annie's hand remained on the envelope. "He gave me an interview," she said. "I earned the position." "I know. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. Other people at the hotel think it too." Marcus lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry." Annie softened. "I need you to understand something. A door opening doesn't mean the person walking through it is weak. Sometimes they still have to climb stairs on the other side." He nodded. "I'm going to finish the program," she continued. "You're going to stay in school. We're going to pay what we can, when we can, and neither of us is quitting because life got expensive." Marcus looked at the envelopes again. "Mom would be proud of you." Annie picked up the apple pie and checked the damaged corner of the box. She would tell me to stop buying dessert before paying the electric bill. She would eat 2 pieces while saying it. That too. They ate roasted chicken with rice and green beans at the small kitchen table. Marcus talked about a bridge model he was building for science class. Annie listened, while separating a chicken wing for his lunch the next day. After dinner, he brought out a list of materials for the project. Most were inexpensive, except for a small electronics kit at the bottom. "How much?" Annie asked. $32. "You need it when?" "Next Thursday." She opened the emergency envelope, removed $35, and handed it to him. Marcus did not take it. "That's for emergencies. A project that keeps you in the program qualifies. What if something happens? Then I get another paycheck." He accepted the money with both hands. Across the city, Richard sat at the dining table in his house with a plate of grilled salmon growing cold in front of him. His phone displayed an email from his daughter. The subject line read, "Sunday dinner." He opened it. "Dad, we're having dinner at 6. No business talk. You can stay for an hour if that's easier." Richard read the message twice. His first instinct was to check the calendar. His second was to draft an apology before any conflict had even appeared. He set the phone down without replying. A folder beside his plate contained Charles's latest proposal. 3,000 positions would be eliminated across the company. The savings looked impressive when arranged in columns. Now Richard knew enough to ask what those columns left out. His phone rang. Eleanor's name appeared. "Have you eaten?" she asked when he answered. "I'm looking at food." "That was not my question." "I've had some." You sound like a witness trying to avoid perjury. Richard picked up his fork. There, one bite. Thank you. Now I can discuss business without feeling responsible for your collapse. What did you find? The entry-level hiring report. Richard put the fork down again. Eleanor continued. The company rejected more than 60% of applicants before a manager reviewed their information. On what basis? Education, employment gaps, previous wages, distance from the property, and automated scoring. Distance? Home address. Certain zip codes receive lower retention scores. Richard understood what that meant. Neighborhoods with limited transit, lower incomes, and fewer formal employment records would lose points before anyone considered the applicant's ability. Who approved it? Operations approved the scoring model. Charles signed the implementation order. Richard opened the folder on the table. Charles had spent weeks insisting the company needed fewer employees while defending a system that blocked applicants before they could speak to anyone. Bring me the full report Monday. Charles says it contains proprietary information. It's our information. He may try to stop the review. Then he can explain why. Eleanor paused. Richard, Annie is doing well, but she is carrying a heavier schedule than the other trainees. I've seen it. Why haven't you changed it? Because if I step in without documenting the pattern, Charles will say I'm protecting her. And if you wait too long, Richard looked at the untouched food and the email from his daughter. Then I become another person who notices too late. After the call, he opened the calendar and accepted the Sunday dinner invitation. Then he returned to Charles's proposal and drew a line across the signature page. In his office across town, Charles received notice that the board vote had been postponed again. He read the message, opened Annie's training file, and reviewed every evaluation written during her first 3 weeks. The comments were consistent. Quick learner, reliable, strong judgment with guests, accepts correction. Charles closed the file. Annie was not failing fast enough. He called the training department and requested a new rotation schedule, one that placed her in the busiest departments during the hotel's most demanding weeks. By Monday morning, Annie would believe she was being trusted with more responsibility. Charles intended to make certain the responsibility became more than anyone without experience could carry. By the 6th week of training, Annie's schedule looked like it had been designed for 3 different employees. She reported before sunrise twice a week, worked guest services on the busiest afternoons, and stayed late whenever the banquet department needed help resetting rooms. She learned to carry a radio, answer a desk phone, read an event sheet, and listen to instructions while 3 people spoke at once. Her shoes still made a faint sound in the service hallway, but she no longer noticed it. On Saturday evening, Bennett Grand was nearly full. A medical conference occupied the lower meeting rooms. A wedding reception filled the main ballroom, and a reunion for retired service members was underway on the 2nd floor. Annie had just delivered updated schedules to the front desk when the lights went out. For 1 second, the lobby disappeared. Then emergency lamps came on along the walls, casting pale light across the marble floor. The music stopped. Computer screens went dark. Several guests called out at once. A bell sounded from behind the front desk. Backup power should engage, Maria said, checking the dead monitor. It did not. Annie reached for the radio clipped to her belt. This is guest services. Do we have an update? Static answered first. Then a maintenance supervisor said, Main power is down across several blocks. The generator is running, but we're not getting full coverage. Elevators are unavailable until we complete safety checks. Guests began moving toward the desk. Some wanted explanations. Others demanded refunds before anyone knew how long the outage would last. A man near the elevators pressed the call button repeatedly. Sir, Annie said, approaching him, the elevators are temporarily unavailable. My wife is on the 9th floor. We're checking every floor. May I have her name and room number? I need to get upstairs. I understand. Give me her information, and I'll make sure someone checks on her while we confirm the safest route. The man gave her the details. Annie wrote them down and passed the note to a supervisor heading toward the service stairs. At the far end of the lobby, an older woman lowered herself into a chair and pressed a hand against her chest. Annie crossed to her. Ma'am, are you feeling unwell? I'm all right. I just don't like the dark. Would you like some water? Yes, please. Annie found a banquet server carrying bottled water and asked him to bring several cases into the lobby. She returned with 1 bottle, opened it, and remained beside the woman until her breathing settled. The radio crackled again. Guest services. We have people gathering near the west stairwell. Annie looked toward Maria, who was speaking with hotel security and 2 department heads. Everyone had information, but no one had a complete picture. What do you need me to do? Annie asked. Maria handed her a flashlight. Help keep the lobby organized. Nobody uses the stairs without staff direction. Record every guest who needs assistance. Annie nodded and moved toward the growing line. Ladies and gentlemen, we are checking the elevators and stairwells now. Please stay in the lobby unless a staff member directs you elsewhere. If you have medication, mobility concerns, or someone waiting upstairs, come to this side of the desk and give me your name. Her voice shook on the first sentence. She steadied it on the second. A man in a conference badge stepped forward. How long is this going to take? I don't know yet. That's not an answer. It's the honest answer. I can give you an update in 10 minutes. Even if the update is that we're still checking. He looked dissatisfied, but he stepped aside. Annie began making a list. Room numbers, medical needs, guests waiting for relatives, people unable to use stairs comfortably. An employee came through the hallway and spoke into his radio. The west exit is partly blocked by banquet carts. Annie turned. Which floor? Second. That's where the reunion is. She called the banquet team and asked them to clear the hallway immediately. Then she sent another employee to confirm the path was open before guests moved through it. A few minutes later, the older veteran Annie had guided on her first day appeared near the lobby stairs. He recognized her badge. Miss Brooks, what happened? Power outage, sir. We're keeping everyone here until the stairways are cleared. He looked at the anxious guests gathering behind her. You need a hand? You're a guest. I've been called worse. Despite herself, Annie smiled. Could you help keep the reunion group together? Some of them may need assistance walking downstairs. I can do that. Please tell them not to rush. We'll send staff up as soon as we have permission. He nodded and turned to the others. You heard her. Stay together and let the hotel do its job. His steady tone settled the group faster than another announcement would have. On the executive floor, Richard had been meeting with 2 board members when the building lost power. He ignored Charles's suggestion that they leave through the private stairwell and went downstairs with a security officer. When he reached the lobby, he saw Annie near the front desk, holding a flashlight and a handwritten list. She was speaking to a couple whose luggage had been left upstairs. We'll bring it down when the elevators are cleared, she told them. For now, I need you to stay where the emergency lights are strongest. You don't know how long this will take? The woman asked. No, ma'am. I won't make up a time just to make this sound better. The woman nodded. Thank you for saying that. Richard stopped several feet away. Charles joined him. Why is a trainee directing guests? Because she saw what needed to be done. She should wait for instructions. She received instructions. Charles watched Annie hand her list to Maria, then begin a second one. One good evening does not make her qualified, he said. Richard kept his attention on the lobby. No, but it tells us what our qualifications failed to predict. Maintenance restored full backup power 23 minutes later. The main lights came on in sections. Applause moved through the lobby, followed by relieved conversation. The elevators remained closed while engineers completed their checks, but the uncertainty had passed. Maria gathered the staff near the front desk. No injuries, no missing guests, and no one entered an uncleared stairwell, she said. That happened because people followed procedure and communicated. Her attention moved to Annie. You identified the blocked exit before we started moving guests. That mattered. Annie lowered the flashlight. The banquet team cleared it. Because you called them. The older veteran approached on his way back upstairs. Young lady, you did well. Thank you, sir. Most people get louder when they're scared. You got clearer. After he left, Annie allowed herself one long breath. Richard walked over. You all right? He asked. My hands won't stop shaking. That usually happens after the work is done. I thought I was going to forget everything. You didn't. I forgot the radio code for maintenance. You found another way to reach them. Annie looked across the lobby at employees returning furniture, checking guests, and restarting computers. People kept asking me questions I couldn't answer. What did you tell them? The truth. Richard nodded. That is often harder than having an answer. Charles stood near the elevators, speaking to a board member. Annie could not hear him, but she saw him glance toward her before turning away. The next morning, a guest posted a video of Annie organizing the lobby. Messages began arriving from people who had attended the conference and reunion. Some praised the staff. Several mentioned Annie by name. Richard read every report before calling Eleanor into his office. "Begin the hiring review today," he said. Eleanor closed the door. "All entry-level positions?" "All of them. Charles will fight it. He already is." Richard placed Annie's original application beside the incident report. One document said she lacked the qualifications to speak with hotel guests. The other showed that, during the most demanding 23 minutes of the week, guests had listened because she gave them a reason to trust her. "I want to know how many people we rejected before they ever had the chance to show us what they could do." By Monday morning, the hiring review is no longer a private question in Richard's office. Eleanor has converted a conference room into a temporary workspace and brought in 4 people who have no reason to protect Charles: an outside labor attorney, a data analyst, a regional human resources director, and a frontline employee representative from one of the company's older hotels. Richard enters at 8 with Annie's original application under his arm. Charles arrives 2 minutes later. "I was told this was a routine audit," Charles says. "It is a review of our hiring practices," Richard replies. "That is not routine." "It should be." The data analyst, Dr. Samuel Reed, connects his laptop to the screen. A chart appears showing applications from the previous 3 years. "We examined entry-level positions across 12 properties," he says. "Front desk assistants, banquet staff, housekeeping coordinators, kitchen support, and inventory clerks." Charles takes a seat. "And 63% of applicants were rejected before a manager opened their files." Richard already knows the percentage, but seeing it spread across the screen makes it harder to dismiss. "What triggered the rejection?" he asks. Samuel changes the slide. "No college degree. Less than 2 years of documented experience. Gaps in employment. Previous wages below a certain level. Distance from the property. Frequent address changes." The employee representative, a woman named Gloria Jenkins, raises her hand slightly. "Why would a person's previous wage decide whether they can carry luggage or help a guest?" Samuel looks toward Charles. Charles answers. "Previous compensation can indicate professional stability, or it can indicate that someone has always been underpaid," Gloria says. Charles ignores the comment. "The system uses multiple factors. No one is rejected for a single reason." Samuel opens another report. "That is not entirely accurate. Some factors carry enough weight to eliminate an applicant by themselves." "Such as?" "Zip code." Richard turns toward Charles. "You approved that?" "I approved a retention model. Employees who travel long distances are more likely to leave." "Then why not ask about transportation?" "Because that would require additional review." Richard's voice remains level. "Additional review is the work." Charles folds his hands. "Automation saves time. That is why we invested in it." Samuel places a map of Chicago on the screen. Several areas are marked in red. These zip codes receive the lowest retention scores. They also have higher concentrations of black residents and lower household income. Charles looks at the map without changing expression. "That does not mean the model considers race. The model does not need a race field to produce a racial pattern," the labor attorney says. Richard studies the red areas. South Side neighborhoods cover much of the map. "Annie's address is in one of those zones," he says. Samuel nods. "Her application lost points for zip code, no degree, no formal work history, and a gap after high school." "She applied weeks after graduation," Richard says. "What gap?" "The software classified any period without recorded employment as inactivity." Gloria lets out a quiet sound of disbelief. "So the system punished her for not having a job while she was applying for her first job." Samuel closes the report. "That is one way to describe it." Charles shifts in his chair. "We can adjust the scoring. There is no need to turn this into a moral crisis." Richard faces him. "A woman walks into one of our hotels asking for work. We advertise an entry-level position. Before she reaches the next block, a machine decides she lacks the experience she came to us to get. One person, thousands of people. We do not know that. That is why we are reviewing it." Charles looks around the table. "Every system creates false negatives. The question is whether the efficiency justifies the margin of error." Gloria answers before Richard can. "People are not a margin of error. The review continues through the morning. They find applicants rejected because they paused work to care for relatives, because they moved more than twice in 3 years, or because their previous jobs were listed as temporary. Several hotel positions require 4-year degrees, even though the duties involve scheduling, communication, and customer assistance. At noon, Richard asks for a list of every policy approval connected to the screening model. Charles pushes back his chair. You are treating ordinary business tools like evidence of misconduct. I'm treating them like decisions, Richard says. Decisions have names attached. You signed the annual technology budget. I approved a budget. I did not review every filter. That is not my fault. No. It is mine. The answer catches Charles off guard. Richard continues. I allowed the company to become large enough that I stopped asking how people entered it. That does not make these policies acceptable. It makes me late. After Charles leaves, Eleanor closes the door. He will not wait for us to finish, she says. Richard looks at the empty chair. What do you think he'll do? Find a way to make the review look personal. You met Annie in a park. You ordered her application reopened. Now you are questioning a system he approved. He'll say, I'm protecting her. He'll say you're risking the company because she made you feel guilty. Richard gathers the reports. Then we stay with the evidence. Across the hotel, Annie is working an afternoon rotation at the guest services desk when Maria asks her to step into the office. Annie closes the door behind her. Did I do something wrong? No, sit down. Maria places a printed copy of Annie's original application on the desk. Mr. Bennett has ordered a review of entry-level hiring. Annie's shoulders tighten. Because of me? You helped him notice the problem. That's not the same thing. No. It isn't. Annie reads the rejection codes beside her name. Education threshold? Experience threshold? Retention risk. What does retention risk mean? Maria hesitates. Your address lowered your score. My address? The system estimates how likely someone is to remain employed. Annie looks at Maria. It decided I would quit before anybody asked why I needed the job. Yes. And nobody thought that was wrong? Most managers never saw the rejection. That doesn't answer me. Maria accepts the correction. No. Not enough people asked whether it was wrong. Annie sets the paper down. She thinks of the hotels that told her to apply online. She had believed managers read her information and chose someone else. Now she understands that in some places, no one ever learned her name. What happens next? She asks. The company reviews the policies. And my name? We will not use it publicly without your permission. I don't want a news story. Understood. I don't want people saying Mr. Bennett changed everything because he likes me. Maria nods. What do you want? Annie looks through the office window at employees helping guests across the lobby. I want them to fix it for people who never meet him. That afternoon, Richard receives Annie's response through Eleanor. He reads it once, then asks the review team to expand the audit to every hotel in the company. Charles receives the same notice less than an hour later. He calls his executive assistant and requests Annie's complete training record, including schedule changes, written warnings, access logs, and every decision she has made without direct approval. His assistant asks, Are we evaluating the trainee program? We're evaluating risk. Should human resources know? Not yet. Charles ends the call and studies the review notice again. Richard is searching the past for people the system has failed. Charles decides the fastest way to stop him is to create a failure no one can defend. 3 days after Charles requests Annie's complete training record, Bennett Grand prepares for one of its largest events of the season. More than 600 guests are expected for a fundraising dinner supporting Lakeshore Medical Foundation. The ballroom is arranged with white linens, silver place settings, and small arrangements of blue flowers. A string quartet rehearses near the stage while servers move between tables checking water glasses and name cards. Annie reports to the banquet office at noon. Her assignment is simple on paper. Assist the event manager, confirm deliveries, and update the kitchen when each part of the program begins. She has never coordinated an event this large, but she has a printed schedule, a radio, and a supervisor named Paul Henson. Paul hands her a vendor list. Check every delivery against this sheet. If something is late, call me before contacting the supplier. Yes, sir. And don't approve additional spending. I understand. Paul leaves to meet the foundation director. Annie begins at the loading area, where flowers, table linens, rental equipment, and beverages arrive within 30 minutes of one another. She checks quantities, records delivery times, and asks two vendors to correct incomplete invoices. At 2:15, a catering truck arrives with several heated containers. The driver gives Annie a clipboard. 200 dinner portions. Annie checks the event sheet. There should be 400. That's not what we have. She looks inside the truck. Is there another delivery? No. Annie checks the vendor list again. The original caterer is responsible for 400 meals. Please wait here, she says. She calls Paul. The call goes to voicemail. She tries his radio. Paul, this is Annie at the loading entrance. I need you to confirm the catering count. No answer. The driver checks his watch. I've got another stop. Give me 2 minutes. Annie calls the caterer's office. A woman answers after several rings. This is Bennett Grand. We received 200 portions, but our order is for 400. The woman asks for the confirmation number. Annie reads it from the sheet. That order was changed yesterday, the woman says. 200 portions, delivery at 2:15. Who changed it? I have initials here. CW. Annie looks at the page in front of her. The printed schedule still shows 400. Can you send the revised order? I can email it. Please do. The message arrives 1 minute later. It contains the hotel logo and a revised quantity. Annie has never seen the document before. She calls Paul again. No answer. By 3 o'clock, the kitchen confirms it can provide only its planned 200 meals. That leaves 200 guests without dinner. The ballroom doors open at 6:30. Annie finds Maria near the front desk and explains the problem. Where is Paul? Maria asks. I can't reach him. Did you contact the caterer? They say the order was changed yesterday. By whom? The revision has Mr. Whitmore's initials. Maria reads the email. Charles does not usually approve banquet orders. What should we do? Maria calls the executive office. Charles's assistant says he is in a meeting and cannot be interrupted. Richard is at another Bennett property across town. Maria looks at the clock. We need food, not explanations. I have a list of local restaurants that help during community events, Annie says. Some of them can prepare large orders quickly. That would require additional spending. I know. You were told not to approve it. Yes. Maria studies her. What are you suggesting? We divide the missing meals between several kitchens. No one place has to prepare all 200. The hotel kitchen can adjust the side dishes, and banquet service can bring the meals out by table instead of all at once. That is a lot to coordinate in 3 hours. It's less difficult than explaining 200 empty plates. Maria takes the radio from her belt. I will authorize emergency purchasing. You make the calls. But every order comes through me. Annie nods and opens her notebook. The first restaurant can provide 40 roasted chicken dinners. A family-owned Italian restaurant agrees to prepare 60 pasta plates. A soul food kitchen Annie knows from neighborhood events can provide 50 portions of baked chicken, greens, and rice. The hotel kitchen stretches its supplies to cover another 30. A bakery near the convention district agrees to deliver extra rolls and desserts. They are still short 20 meals. Annie calls the diner that rejected her application. The same manager answers. This is Annie Brooks. We spoke several weeks ago. There is a pause. I remember. I'm calling from Bennett Grand. We need 20 prepared meals within 90 minutes. Can your kitchen do it? What kind? Something that travels well and can be served at a formal dinner. That's a large order without notice. I know. I can send payment confirmation now. The manager asks for the hotel name again, as though he may have heard incorrectly. Then he says, we can do meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and vegetables. That works. Before ending the call, he asks, you work there now? Yes. Good for you. Annie does not remind him that he refused to give her an interview. Thank you for helping, she says. By 5:45, food arrives from 5 kitchens. The loading area fills with labeled containers and invoices. Annie creates a table chart so guests seated together receive the same meal. The banquet captain adjusts the service plan. Maria approves each purchase while Annie checks the counts. Paul finally appears at 6:10. What happened here? Annie hands him the revised order. He reads it. I never approved this. We couldn't reach you. My phone was in the conference office. We were missing 200 meals. You called outside restaurants? Maria authorized the purchases. Paul looks toward the loading area. Do you realize what this will cost? Yes. You should have waited for me. The guests arrive in 20 minutes. Paul starts to respond, then looks at the completed chart in her hand. Is everything covered? All 600 meals. He exhales and takes the chart. Get this to the banquet captain. The dinner begins on time. Guests never see the phone calls, revised invoices, or crowded loading area. They hear speeches, applaud the foundation's work, and receive dinner with only a small delay between sections of the ballroom. Near the kitchen doors, Maria speaks quietly to Annie. You handled that well. We spent more than planned. We also served every guest. Mr. Whitmore won't see it that way. Maria glances toward the ballroom entrance. Charles stands there with Paul, holding the emergency expense report. He waits until service ends before asking Annie to join him in the banquet office. On the desk are copies of every invoice. Charles sits across from her. You approved thousands of dollars in unplanned expenses. Maria approved them. You arranged the purchases. Yes. You contacted outside vendors without completing the standard review. We had less than 3 hours. That does not remove the policy. Annie places the revised catering order on the desk. This change caused the shortage. Charles barely looks at it. My initials appear on dozens of documents each week. Did you reduce the order? No. Then someone used your initials. His expression remains controlled. Be careful with accusations. I'm asking a question, and I'm reviewing your conduct. Annie keeps her hands on her notebook. Would you rather we had served 400 people and told the rest there was nothing left? I would rather a trainee follow instructions. The instruction was to help the event succeed. The instruction was not to spend company money without authority. Maria gave the authority. Charles closes the expense file. Until we determine what happened, you are not to discuss this with other employees. Annie rises. Am I being disciplined? That decision will be made tomorrow. The next morning, her badge does not open the employee entrance. A security guard approaches with an envelope from Human Resources. Inside is a notice placing Annie on paid suspension while the company reviews her decisions during the fundraiser. She reads it twice before looking through the glass doors at the hotel, where she has spent weeks proving she can do the work. This time, the system does not reject her in 38 seconds. It waits until she succeeds, then uses the success against her. The security guard does not touch Annie's arm or ask her to leave. He simply waits beside the employee entrance while she reads the suspension notice again. Paid suspension pending investigation. Return company property upon request. Do not contact vendors connected to the fundraiser. Annie folds the page along its original crease. Who made this decision? Human Resources delivered it this morning, the guard says. Miss Alvarez asked me to tell you she's sorry she couldn't meet you herself. Is Mr. Bennett here? I don't know. Annie slips the notice into her bag. Several employees pass through the entrance. Some greet her before noticing the disabled badge in her hand. Their expressions change, and each person suddenly finds a reason to keep moving. She walks away before anyone can offer sympathy. At 10 that morning, Human Resources contacts her and schedules a formal interview by video call. Eleanor joins as an observer, along with a labor attorney Annie has never met. Charles does not attend. The attorney begins. Miss Brooks, this meeting is part of an independent review. Your suspension is not a finding of misconduct. Do you understand? I understand what the words mean. He pauses. Do you disagree with the process? I disagree with being locked out before anyone asked me what happened. That is why we're speaking now. Annie places her notebook beside the computer, then asks. They review the fundraiser minute by minute. Annie explains when the catering truck arrived, how many meals were missing, which calls she made, and why the outside orders could not wait. She provides the revised document carrying Charles's initials and the email sent by the caterer. Did Mr. Whitmore personally instruct you to reduce the order? The attorney asks. No. Did you see him alter the document? No. Then what are you alleging? I'm saying the order changed. Nobody told the event team, and the only revised copy I received had his initials. Could the caterer have made an error? They said someone from the hotel changed it. Could Paul Henson have approved the change? He told me he didn't. The attorney writes a note. You were instructed not to approve additional spending. Maria approved it. Before or after you contacted the restaurants? Before. Eleanor speaks for the first time. Do you have messages confirming that? Annie opens her phone and shows the time-stamped exchange Maria sent while Annie coordinated the orders. Emergency purchases authorized. Send every invoice to me. The attorney reads it. That supports your account. It's not an account. It's what happened. Eleanor gives Annie a measured look. Not a warning, but a reminder to stay focused. The attorney continues. Why didn't you call Mr. Bennett? Because he isn't my supervisor. You had his number? No. You could have asked someone to reach him. And then everyone would say I survived because the owner stepped in again. Did that concern influence your decisions? Yes. I wanted to do the work without asking him to protect me. The attorney closes one folder and opens another. Did you understand that failure to follow purchasing procedures could lead to discipline? Yes. Would you make the same decision again? Annie thinks about 600 guests waiting behind the ballroom doors and 200 places with no meals prepared. I would ask Maria to put the authorization in writing sooner. I would document every call as I made it. But I would not leave 200 people sitting at empty tables just to protect myself. The interview ends after 40 minutes. Eleanor remains on the call when the others disconnect. You handled that well, she says. I'm still suspended. Yes. Does Richard know? He knows. And what is he doing? Making sure the investigation can survive people accusing him of protecting you. Annie presses her lips together. That sounds like a careful way of doing nothing. It may feel that way. It feels exactly that way. Eleanor does not defend him. You have every right to be angry. Just don't confuse a slow process with no process. My rent doesn't move slowly. You are still being paid. For now. Eleanor's expression softens. Keep every message. Write down every detail you remember. Truth is strongest when it arrives organized. After the call, Annie sits at the kitchen table and copies the fundraiser timeline into her notebook. She records names, times, calls, deliveries, and instructions until her hand aches. Marcus arrives home and sees the temporary badge beside her. Why aren't you at work? I'm on paid suspension. He sets down his backpack. What did you do? The question hurts more than Annie expects. I helped serve 600 people. That gets you suspended? Apparently the expensive part does. She explains the missing meals and the emergency orders. Marcus listens, then picks up the notice. Can they fire you? They can fire anyone. Then I should leave the program. No. The payment is due next week. I said no. You might not have a job next week. Annie closes the notebook. And you leaving school won't give it back. It would save money. It would teach them they can take something from both of us. Marcus looks toward the envelope marked school. I don't want you losing everything because of me. You are not the reason things are hard. But you keep paying for me. That's what family does. I can help. You can help by finishing what you started. His eyes lower. What if you can't fix this? Annie's voice becomes quieter. Then I find another job. But I will not make your future smaller because somebody decided mine was convenient to damage. A knock comes from the hall. Mrs. Harris, their neighbor, stands outside holding a covered casserole dish. I heard Annie was home on a workday, she says. That usually means somebody needs food. We're fine, Annie replies. Mrs. Harris steps inside and places the dish on the counter. Fine people still eat. Marcus lifts the lid. Chicken and rice. Put it back before you count every piece, Mrs. Harris tells him. Annie almost smiles. Mrs. Harris removes her coat. Now tell me what happened. While Annie explains. Across downtown, the investigation team begins tracing the revised catering order. The hotel's technology department confirms the document was created inside Bennett Grand, not by the caterer. Someone accessed the event system after business hours using an administrative account connected to Charles's office. Richard reads the preliminary report in his office. Can we identify the person? He asks. Not yet, the investigator says. Several employees have access through that account. Charles enters before the meeting ends. This review has gone far enough, he says. You are spending company resources to defend a trainee who ignored policy. Richard closes the report. We found evidence the order was changed internally. Then discipline whoever changed it. That is the plan. Charles places a newspaper on the desk. The business section carries a short article about Richard personally recruiting an inexperienced woman after meeting her in a park. Someone spoke to the press, Richard says. Charles points to the article. The board believes your judgment is compromised. They want an emergency vote. When? Friday. To remove me? To limit your authority until you are fit to lead without turning every decision into a personal apology. Richard looks at the newspaper, then at the report linking the altered order to Charles's office. You seem confident for a man whose account is part of an investigation. My account is used by an entire department. Then you should want us to find out who used it. Charles gives him a controlled smile. I want this company protected. So do I. No, Richard. You want to feel like a good man. Charles leaves. Richard picks up his phone to call Annie, then stops before pressing her number. Anything he says now could be used to claim they are coordinating their stories. He sets the phone down. At the apartment, Annie receives a news alert with her own photograph taken outside the hotel. The headline calls her Richard Bennett's mystery hire. Marcus reads it over her shoulder. They're making it sound like you did something wrong. Annie turns off the screen. They've been doing that since before they knew my name. By Thursday morning, the photograph outside Bennett Grand has spread across business sites and local news pages. Annie's name appears beside phrases such as unusual hire, personal project, and billionaire's second chance. None of the articles mentions the interview panel, the 6 weeks of training, or the guests who wrote letters praising her work. Richard reads every headline in his office while the board waits on a secured video call. Charles appears on the largest screen. This is no longer an internal personnel matter. It became public because someone gave the press confidential information, Richard says. The information was accurate. It was selective. Charles does not deny being involved. The board has prepared a reasonable path forward. Accept it, and we avoid further damage. A document appears on Richard's screen. The terms are direct. Annie remains suspended until the investigation ends. The hiring audit stops immediately. The workforce reduction moves forward. Charles receives temporary control over daily operations, while Richard keeps his title and public role. Richard reads the final condition twice. The company will describe the situation as a routine governance adjustment. You want my name on the building and my hands away from every decision, he says. We want stability. You want obedience. We want you to understand that one trainee cannot become more important than the company. Richard closes the document. She isn't. Charles gives a small nod, as though Richard has finally accepted his point. Richard continues. The truth is, several board members shift on their screens. Charles speaks more slowly. Think carefully. Thousands of employees depend on this company. If our lenders lose confidence, if the expansion collapses, if the share price falls, you will not be the only person paying for your principles. The argument reaches the part of Richard that has kept him awake for weeks. He knows a careless decision can affect retirement accounts, health coverage, mortgages, and families he will never meet. Charles is using that responsibility as a shield, but the responsibility itself is real. Richard asks for 24 hours. Charles smiles. The vote is tomorrow at 9. When the call ends, Eleanor enters with another report. We confirmed the article came from a communications consultant hired through Charles's office, she says. Can we prove he ordered it? Not yet. Richard points to the proposal on his screen. He offered me a ceremonial title. And what did you say? That I needed time. Eleanor studies him. Do you? I need to know whether stopping him protects people or leaves them without jobs when the company loses financing. That is a fair question. Annie won't see it that way. No. She is paying the price while you calculate everyone else's. Richard looks at the city beyond the glass. That doesn't make the calculation false. It doesn't make her anger false either. Annie arrives at the executive floor that afternoon after the independent attorney approves a meeting with Richard. She carries no folder and wears no hotel badge. Eleanor remains present so no one can later claim the conversation was secret. Richard stands as Annie enters. She does not sit. I saw the proposal, she says. He glances at Eleanor, who gives a slight nod. Then you know I haven't accepted it. You haven't refused it. Not yet. Annie's face tightens. How much more do they need to do? We are still proving who changed the order. They used his office account. Several people had access. They gave the press my name and picture. We're tracing that too. And until every person leaves a signed confession, I stay home while Charles keeps his office? Richard keeps his voice steady. If I act before the evidence is complete, the board can reverse every decision I make. Then what was the point of telling me the process would be fair? The process is what protects the result. The process protected Charles for years. That is why we have to build a case strong enough to survive him. Annie walks to the window, then turns back. Do you know what this looks like from where I'm standing? Tell me. It looks like you gave me a chance when it cost you nothing. Now it costs something. And suddenly everything is complicated. That isn't fair. Neither is waiting at home while strangers decide whether I earned work they never watched me do. Richard's control slips. This is not only about your job. I know. That's what scares me. He stops. Annie continues, quieter now. You gave me a job because I shared my lunch. Now I need to know whether you believe people like me deserve a seat when there's nothing in it for you. I believe that. Then act like it. If I destroy the company trying to prove a point, 3,000 people may lose their jobs anyway. It's always called complicated when the person paying the price has less power. Eleanor lowers her eyes. Richard has no answer that does not sound like another delay. Annie reaches for the door. Where are you going? Home. Your suspension is paid. That isn't what I mean. She looks at him one last time. I thought the hardest part would be proving I could do the work. I didn't know I'd also have to prove the truth mattered after the work was done. She leaves before Richard can stop her. An hour later, he exits Bennett Grand through the same side entrance he used on the day they met. He sends his driver home and walks toward Grant Park. The afternoon is warm. Office workers cross the paths, phones in hand, moving toward trains and buses. Richard finds the stone bench and sits in the place Annie chose weeks earlier. He takes out his wallet. The receipt is still inside, folded behind his identification cards. Annie's number has begun to fade. The 3 words beneath it remain readable. I learned fast. Richard turns the paper between his fingers. He has spent years believing leadership means carrying consequences other people cannot see. Now he wonders how often that belief has allowed him to postpone choices until weaker people absorb the damage. Eleanor finds him near sunset. She sits beside him without asking why he came. Charles thinks you'll accept, she says. He may be right. No, he thinks fear will make the decision for you. Richard looks toward the path. If the board removes me, I may lose control of the investigation. If you accept his terms, you give it away. I could keep my position and change things later. Eleanor turns toward him. Later is where powerful people send justice when they want it to disappear. Richard folds the receipt again. What if I lose the company? You may. What happens to everyone who trusted me to protect it? That depends on what you think protection means. He gives her a tired look. Eleanor continues, justice is not charity, Richard. Charity depends on the giver. Justice is what people are owed. Annie does not need you to feel generous. She needs you to refuse a lie, even when the truth charges you full price. The last light reaches the edge of the path. Richard takes out his phone and calls the independent attorney. I want every hiring file preserved tonight, he says. Move the data outside Charles's control. The attorney asks whether Richard understands the board may treat that order as an act of defiance. I understand. What else? Prepare the full audit for release. Notify the employee representatives. Freeze the workforce vote and the expansion agreement. That may trigger tomorrow's removal vote. I know. Richard ends the call and makes another. This time, he reaches the board secretary. Move tomorrow's meeting to Bennett Grand, he says. Invite the independent investigators, the employee representatives, and every witness willing to speak. The secretary hesitates. Mr. Whitmore will object. He can do it in person. Richard places the receipt back inside his wallet. Weeks earlier, Annie had offered him half a sandwich because she thought he was a man who needed help. She had risked what little she had without asking whether the choice would benefit her. Now Richard finally understands the work she believed he was searching for. It is not keeping his title. It is deciding what the title is worth when keeping it requires silence. Before sunrise, Eleanor receives the first message from an employee who wants to speak. By 7, there are 4. By 8, there are 9. Some messages contain only a name and phone number. Others include copies of emails, schedules, evaluation forms, and complaints that were closed without explanation. Richard reads them in a temporary conference room at Bennett Grand, while the independent legal team creates a record for each person. These people worked here for years, he says. Why are they only coming forward now? Gloria Jenkins, the employee representative, looks up from a stack of documents. Because yesterday, They could lose their jobs for speaking. Today, they think someone might finally listen. That should not require a crisis. No, Gloria says. But it usually requires protection. The first witness is a banquet supervisor named Calvin Moore. He has worked for Bennett Hospitality for 11 years and is 6 months away from qualifying for a larger retirement contribution. He sits across from the attorney with his hands clasped around a paper cup. I almost turned around downstairs, he admits. You can leave at any time, the attorney says. Calvin shakes his head. That's what I've been doing for 3 years. He describes how trainees without college degrees were repeatedly assigned to busy shifts without proper guidance. When they made mistakes, the errors became evidence that the training program did not work. Employees from wealthier areas received more time with senior supervisors, while applicants from Southside neighborhoods were sent into the most demanding departments. Were you instructed to do that? Richard asks. Not in those exact words. What words were used? Calvin looks toward the recorder. We were told to invest our time in people who looked like long-term management material. Who decided what that looked like? Mr. Whitmore's office sent the lists. Calvin provides copies of 3 schedules. Each one shows the same pattern Annie experienced. Longer rotations, fewer training hours, and more assignments during peak periods. The next witness is a former human resources coordinator. She joins by video because she no longer works for the company. I filed 7 complaints about the screening system, she says. All 7 were returned with the same instruction. Close the matter unless the applicant could prove deliberate discrimination. The labor attorney asks, how would a rejected applicant prove that? They couldn't. They never saw the scoring system. Richard looks down at the reports. Who gave the instruction? She shares an email bearing Charles's name. Protect the company from speculative claims. Do not create liability by validating unsupported patterns. The language is careful. That is what makes it useful. Charles never writes that certain applicants should be excluded. He writes that the company should not examine why the same groups keep disappearing. By late morning, the technology department completes its review of the altered catering order. A technician named Brian Lee enters carrying a sealed drive. The revision came from an administrator account assigned to Mr. Whitmore's office, he says. We recovered an earlier system log before it was overwritten. Can you identify the person who used it? The attorney asks. The login came from a workstation outside his executive assistant's office. Security footage shows his operations manager entering that area after normal hours. Do we know what he did at the computer? Not from the footage alone, but the order changed during the 12 minutes he was there. The operations manager is brought in with his attorney present. At first, he denies knowing anything about the order. Then the investigators show him the system log, footage, and a message from Charles sent that afternoon. Make sure the trainee is given full responsibility. We need a clean measure of whether the program works. The manager reads the message twice. He told me to reduce the outside order, he says. Richard's jaw tightens. Why? He said the hotel kitchen could cover the difference. Could it? No. So you knew the event would be short. The man looks at the table. He said, management needed to see what happened when inexperienced people were trusted too quickly. Did he tell you to hide the change from Annie and Paul? Yes. Did he tell you to alter the expense report afterward? The manager hesitates. His attorney places a hand near his arm. Answer only what you know. He told accounting to classify every emergency purchase as Annie's unauthorized decision. Richard stands and walks to the window. He has suspected Charles for days. But suspicion remains easier to carry than confirmation. Eleanor joins him. You need to sit down, she says quietly. I'm fine. No, you're angry, tired, and about to walk into a board meeting where every reaction will be examined. Sit down anyway. Richard turns toward her. He risked an entire event to damage one trainee. He risked more than that. Annie was simply the person standing where he wanted the system to break. Richard returns to the table. Contact Annie, he tells the attorney. Tell her what we found. You should not call her yourself. I know. The attorney reaches Annie just after noon. She listens without interrupting while he explains that the altered order came from Charles's department and that a manager has admitted carrying out the instruction. So, the suspension is over? She asks. The investigators are recommending immediate reinstatement. Recommending? The board must approve several actions today. And Charles is still in the building? Yes. Annie's reply is controlled. Then the investigation isn't finished. We would like you to attend the meeting tomorrow and provide a statement. Will Richard be there? Yes. Will the employees who spoke up be protected? The proposed order includes protection against retaliation. Proposed isn't promised. The attorney pauses. What would you need before agreeing? Annie gives him 4 conditions. She will speak in her own words. Her story will not be used in advertising. The hiring review will continue, even if her record is cleared. Every employee who provides evidence must receive written protection. I'll take those to the board, he says. Take them to Richard first. An hour later, Eleanor reads the conditions aloud. Charles's allies on the board object immediately. She is a trainee, one director says. She cannot dictate governance policy. Richard closes the file. She is a witness whose career was targeted by an executive officer. She can decide the terms under which she participates. Another director asks, and if we refuse? Then we explain tomorrow why this company expects courage from employees while offering them no protection. Richard signs the 4 conditions. When Annie receives the document, she reads every line before adding her name. She does not feel victorious. Her badge remains on the kitchen table, and the people who tried to remove her still have offices, attorneys, and votes. Eleanor calls soon afterward. You'll enter through the main doors tomorrow, she says. Why does that matter? Because Charles wants you brought through the employee entrance and kept away from the board until you are called. I'm not ashamed of being an employee. I know. This is not about shame. It is about making sure no one treats you like evidence they can store outside. Annie looks at the signed protections. I don't want one door open for me while the hallway stays locked. Neither does Richard. He had time to decide that. Yes, Eleanor says, and you have every right to remember it. The next morning, employees gather behind the glass doors of Bennett Grand. Some wear uniforms. Others have come on their days off. Calvin stands near Gloria, with the schedules he saved. Brian carries the recovered system logs. Maria holds Annie's original evaluation beside the report from the blackout. Annie approaches from the sidewalk in her white shirt and black flats. Richard waits inside, not beside the board members, but near the employees who chose to speak. When the doors open, Annie walks into the hotel without lowering her head. She is not returning as the woman Richard rescued from rejection. She is returning as the person Charles tried to erase and could no longer silence. Annie crosses the lobby with Eleanor beside her while employees line the walls near the ballroom entrance. No one applauds. The support shows in quieter ways. A nod from Maria, a raised hand from Calvin, Gloria holding the door until Annie reaches it. Inside, the board members sit around a long table facing a smaller section reserved for witnesses. Charles occupies the chair nearest the presentation screen. His suit is dark, his notes arranged in exact rows, his expression composed enough to suggest the meeting is an inconvenience rather than a threat. Richard stands near the employee representatives. Charles notices the choice. Your seat is at the head of the table. I know where it is. Then perhaps we should begin with everyone in the proper place. Richard takes the chair at the head, but he does not move the employee files Eleanor placed beside him. The independent attorney explains the procedure. Each side may present documents, question witnesses, and respond to the investigation. The board will then vote on Charles's suspension, Richard's authority, and whether the hiring review continues. Charles speaks first. He does not raise his voice. He does not insult Annie directly. He presents charts, cost reports, and copies of company policies. According to his version, Annie is an inexperienced trainee who exceeded her authority during a major event. Richard, emotionally affected by their unusual meeting, then turned an ordinary disciplinary review into a company-wide crisis. The issue is not whether Miss Brooks is a decent person, Charles says. I assume she is. The issue is whether personal sympathy should replace professional standards. Annie sits beside Gloria, hands folded over her notebook. Charles displays the emergency expense report. Miss Brooks contacted unapproved vendors, committed company funds, and ignored the limits of her position. Mr. Bennett then ordered a national review of our hiring system because the same trainee had once been rejected by automated screening. A board member asks, "Are you suggesting the review has no merit?" I am suggesting its timing is compromised. Charles changes the slide. Annie's photograph from the newspaper appears beside the headline about Richard's mystery hire. This company employs more than 40,000 people. We cannot rewrite policy every time the chairman forms a personal connection with one applicant. Gloria shifts beside Annie. He wants you angry. I know, Annie says quietly. Charles presents the cost of the new audit, the delayed expansion, and the projected loss if the workforce plan is frozen. By the time he finishes, the company appears to be one emotional decision away from financial collapse. Then he turns toward Annie. Miss Brooks, without Mr. Bennett, where would you be today? The attorney objects. That question is argumentative. I'll answer, Annie says. Richard looks toward her, but she is already standing. Without Mr. Bennett, I would probably still be looking for work, she says. And this company would still be turning away people it never bothered to know. Charles presses his lips together. So you agree that your employment resulted from special access? My interview did. And your employment? My employment resulted from the interview. You had no formal experience. That was the reason I entered a training program. You were given access to that program because the chairman intervened. Yes. So your opportunity was not equal to that of other applicants. No, Annie says. That is the point. Other applicants should have had the same opportunity to speak to a person before a machine rejected them. A few employees exchange glances. Charles walks toward the table where Annie is seated. You violated purchasing policy. Maria Alvarez authorized the purchases. You arranged them. Yes. You contacted vendors the hotel had not approved. Yes. You knew you did not have authority to spend that money. I knew 600 guests had been promised dinner and 200 meals were missing. That is not an answer. It is the reason for the decision. Charles turns toward the board. This is what happens when compassion is mistaken for competence. Rules are treated as optional whenever an employee believes the outcome justifies the violation. Annie opens her notebook. At 2:17, I called my supervisor. At 2:19, I used the radio. At 2:24, the caterer confirmed the order had been changed. At 2:31, I informed Maria. At 2:36, she authorized emergency purchasing in writing. She passes a copy of the message to the attorney. I did not ignore the process. I used every part of it that was still working. Charles's jaw tightens. And when the process did not give you the answer you wanted, I acted under the authority of a department director, because you believed you knew better, because the guests were already coming. Charles returns to his chair. You see yourself as the person who saved the event. No, the kitchen staff, drivers, servers, restaurant owners, Maria, and the banquet team saved it. I made phone calls. Then why are we all here? Annie looks across the table. Because somebody changed the order and expected me to fail. When I didn't, they used the solution as proof that I should never have been hired. Charles looks toward the attorney. That conclusion is not supported by her personal knowledge. No, Annie says. It is supported by the system logs, the altered report, the camera footage, and the manager who admitted following your instructions. The attorney asks Annie to describe her employment from the beginning. She explains the first weeks without making herself sound faultless. She tells them about transferring a call to the wrong department, forgetting extensions, and asking questions when she did not know an answer. She describes the heavier schedule, the supply error, the night the power failed, and the fundraiser. I had things to learn, she says. I still do. Being new is not the same as being useless. Charles interrupts. No one called you useless. They didn't have to. The screening system decided my education, address, and empty work history meant I was not worth meeting. The system did not know your race. It knew my zip code. It knew what school I attended. It knew I had never earned enough money to meet its idea of stability. That is not discrimination. It is data. Data reflects the choices of the people who build it. Charles looks toward the board. Miss Brooks is now offering opinions on technology and employment law. I'm offering an opinion on what happened to me. He turns back to her. Do you believe every rejected applicant deserves an interview? No. Then where should the company draw the line? On skills that matter to the job. That sounds simple because you have never managed a national company. Annie takes a moment before answering. You're right. I haven't. But I know what it feels like when a rule measures everything except whether you can do the work. Charles gathers his papers. Standards exist for a reason. Annie closes her notebook. A standard that only recognizes people who look, speak, and live like the people who wrote it is just a locked gate with better manners. No one interrupts her. Charles turns to Richard. This is the person whose judgment you are placing above your executive team. Richard rises. I am not placing Annie's judgment above anyone's. I am placing evidence above convenience. Charles gestures toward the expense reports. The evidence shows she violated policy. The evidence shows your office created the shortage, concealed the change, and altered the report after she solved the problem. You have not heard my full response. I've heard your response for years. Costs, efficiency, risk. You found cleaner words every time the people affected had less power than the people making the decision. Charles looks toward the board members. He is proving my argument. This has become personal. Richard takes Annie's original application from the file and sets it beside her incident report. One document says she was not qualified to speak with our guests. The other shows those guests trusted her during a crisis. Both came from this company. He faces the board. Annie did not fail our standards. Our standards failed to recognize Annie. Richard left Annie's application on the table and turned toward the board. I approved the budgets that funded this system. I accepted reports without asking who had been removed before the numbers reached me. Charles did not build that freedom alone. I gave it to him. Charles rose. You are admitting that you failed to supervise the company. Yes. Several board members looked up from their notes. Richard continued. Not knowing every detail may explain how it happened. It does not remove my responsibility. Charles stepped away from his chair. Then this board has no reason to trust your leadership. Leadership is not pretending every failure started with someone else. Richard nodded to the independent attorney, who placed a sealed drive beside the conference monitor. The first file showed the original catering order for 400 meals. The second showed the reduced order created from an administrative account assigned to Charles's department. Timestamps placed the change after the banquet team had completed its final review. The attorney displayed an internal message from Charles to his operations manager. Give the trainee full responsibility. We need a clean measure of whether the program works. Charles pointed at the screen. That message does not instruct anyone to reduce an order. No, the attorney said. The instruction was given during a phone call. Your operations manager has provided a sworn statement. The man sat among the witnesses with his attorney. He kept his attention on the table. Charles faced him. You are blaming me to save your position. The operations manager looked up. You told me the kitchen would cover the difference, and you accepted that without confirmation. You told me not to contact the kitchen. Charles's expression tightened. You misunderstood. You told me Annie needed to fail where everyone could see it. A board member raised a hand. Do you have evidence beyond his statement? Brian Lee, the technology technician, moved forward. Yes. He presented the recovered access logs, the workstation location, and security footage showing the manager entering the administrative area after regular hours. He then displayed the expense report created after the fundraiser. The first version listed Maria Alvarez as the approving director, Brian explained. A later version removed her authorization and classified the purchases as decisions made only by Miss Brooks. Who changed it? Richard asked. The same department account. Charles looked toward the board. Shared accounts create uncertainty. That is why no individual should be judged from these records alone. Gloria Jenkins opened another file. Then perhaps we should consider the pattern. She distributed schedules from former trainees. The most demanding shifts, weakest supervision, and harshest evaluations repeatedly went to employees without degrees or applicants recruited from lower-income neighborhoods. Calvin Moore spoke next. We were told to focus training resources on people who looked like future management. Charles interrupted. That is a normal business judgment. Calvin shook his head. The people on your preferred list came from the same schools, the same neighborhoods, and the same kind of families. The others had to prove themselves while carrying twice the work. They were expected to meet company standards. They were expected to fail quietly. The board chair called for order before Charles could respond. The independent attorney presented the hiring audit. Hotel after hotel showed the same result. Applicants from several South Side zip codes were rejected at higher rates, even when their relevant skills matched those of candidates who advanced. Employment gaps for caregiving lowered scores. Previous low wages were treated as evidence of low potential. Degrees were required for positions whose daily duties did not need them. One board member removed his glasses. Was race included in the program? No, the analyst said. But zip code, school history, wage level, and employment patterns acted as substitutes closely connected to race and income. Charles sat down. Every national employer uses screening tools. That does not make every tool fair, Gloria said. Richard moved to the center of the table. My name appears on the annual technology approvals. My position protected these policies. That makes the work of changing them mine. He presented the measures he intended to implement. An independent review of every entry-level requirement, removal of unnecessary degree rules, paid training for applicants without formal experience, protection for employees who reported misconduct, and reopening of complaints closed without investigation. Charles gave a short laugh. And who pays for this? I will begin by giving up my annual bonus and reducing my executive compensation. That is theater. No, theater is announcing values while charging workers for them. Richard continued. The proposed reduction of 3,000 positions would stop until an outside review determined whether the savings could be achieved without removing employees. The expansion agreement would remain suspended. A portion of Richard's company shares would fund training and compensation for workers harmed by retaliatory decisions. Charles turned to the board. He is placing the company at financial risk to protect his image. Richard looked at Annie before answering. Kindness opened one door. Justice means making sure the next person does not need to meet a billionaire in a park to find it. Annie lowered her eyes for a moment, then faced the board again. The chair called for 2 votes. The first concerned Charles's immediate suspension pending termination review and referral of the evidence to the proper authorities. Charles's supporters voted against it. 2 members abstained. The remaining votes supported suspension. Charles stood before the result was formally recorded. You think these people will thank you when the share price falls? He asked Richard. You think loyalty survives a bad quarter? Loyalty built on fear is not loyalty. You built this company with me. I built it with thousands of people whose names never appeared in our reports. Security waited near the door. Charles collected his tablet but left the papers behind. As he passed Annie, he said, "This does not make you qualified." Annie answered without raising her voice. "My work already did that." The second vote concerned Richard's authority and the reform plan. For several minutes, the board remained divided. One director argued that delaying expansion would cost the company millions. Another warned that ignoring the evidence would cost more in lawsuits, contracts, and employee trust. The final vote approved the independent reforms by a narrow margin. Richard retained his position under external oversight. Annie's paid suspension was removed from her record. Her training evaluation would continue under a new supervisor, and every emergency decision from the fundraiser would be reviewed in its full context. Maria reached across the witness table and returned Annie's badge. "It should work now," she said. Annie closed her hand around it. "It should have worked before." "Yes," Maria replied. "It should have." Employees began leaving the meeting. But Richard remained at the table. The victory brought no celebration. The company still faced investigations, financial consequences, and years of repair. Annie approached him. "You almost waited too long," she said. "I know. I'm still angry." "You have reason to be." She studied him, then clipped the badge to her shirt. "What happens now?" Richard looked at the files covering the table. "Now we do the work without pretending one vote fixed everything." 1 year later, Annie entered Bennett Grand through the main doors at 7:45 on a Monday morning. She no longer needed to check whether her badge worked. The security staff knew her name. The front desk called when new trainees arrived, and a small office near the training room now carried a sign that read, "Annie Brooks, Training Coordinator." She still arrived early. On her desk sat the first temporary badge Maria had given her. Annie had placed it in a simple wooden frame beside a photograph of her mother. The plastic was scratched, and the words "Guest Services Trainee" had begun to fade, but she kept it where she could see it. It reminded her that an open door was only the beginning. That morning, 12 new employees waited in the training room. Some had never worked in a hotel. One woman was returning to work after years of caring for an elderly parent. A man in his 50s had lost his manufacturing job when the plant closed. 2 applicants spoke English as a second language. None had been rejected because of an address, a gap in employment, or a lack of college education. Annie stood at the front of the room and handed out orientation folders. "You will make mistakes," she told them. "Ask questions before a small mistake becomes an expensive one. If someone corrects you, listen." If someone disrespects you, document it. Those are not the same thing. A trainee near the back raised his hand. Did you start in this program? I did. Were you nervous? Every morning for the first month. A few people smiled. What changed? He asked. I stopped thinking nervous meant unprepared. After orientation, Annie met with Maria to review the latest results from the First Door initiative. The company had removed unnecessary degree requirements from more than 2,000 positions. Entry-level applications were now reviewed by trained staff before any automated rejection. Paid apprenticeships operated in 8 cities, and employee representatives attended quarterly hiring reviews. The changes had not solved everything. Some managers resisted the additional training costs. A few properties continued producing uneven promotion rates. Outside auditors had found new problems that required correction. Richard insisted those findings be published rather than hidden inside executive reports. Applications from Southside neighborhoods increased again, Maria said. How many reached an interview? 72% of those who met the job-related requirements. Last quarter? 64. Annie nodded. Better. Maria smiled. You could say good. Good makes people comfortable. You sound like Eleanor. That is becoming a serious concern. They were still laughing when Eleanor appeared at the office door carrying 2 coffees. I heard my name being used without proper supervision. Maria accepted 1 cup. Annie was criticizing your influence. I consider that evidence of good judgment. At 63, Eleanor had reduced her schedule to 4 days a week, though few people believed she worked fewer hours. She now chaired the Employee Protection Committee and reviewed every retaliation complaint before it reached senior management. She handed Annie an envelope. What's this? Your community college sent confirmation for next semester. Annie opened it. Her evening courses in hospitality management had been approved. I could have checked the portal. You could also allow someone to bring you good news. Annie looked over the class list. Accounting, labor relations, and hotel operations would fill 3 evenings each week. Eleanor noticed her expression. Too much? Probably. Are you going to do it anyway? Definitely. Across town, Marcus stood beside a model transportation system at a regional science exhibition. His project had earned 2nd place, along with a small scholarship for the following school year. When Annie arrived after work, he held up the certificate. 2nd place, he said. That sounds like somebody owes you a celebration dinner. I was thinking pizza. I was thinking something that includes vegetables. Pizza has tomatoes. That argument has failed before. He reached beneath the display table and brought out a shoebox. These are for you. Annie opened it and found a pair of black work shoes with cushioned soles. You spent your prize money on shoes? Only part of it. You were supposed to save that. You kept your promise. Now let me keep mine. Annie ran a finger across the new leather. What promise? That when I could help, I would. She closed the box before emotion changed her voice. I'm still making you eat vegetables. I expected that. Richard's life had changed more slowly. He remained chairman under independent oversight, but he no longer attended every meeting or approved every operational decision. He had hired leaders with experience in kitchens, housekeeping departments, front desks, and banquet halls, not only people who had spent their careers inside corporate offices. He had also begun leaving work before dinner twice a week. On Sundays, he drove to his daughter's home without bringing financial reports. Their first few meals had been uncomfortable. She did not forgive years of absence. Because he finally appeared at the table, Richard stopped asking her to. He listened, returned the following Sunday, and kept returning. One late August afternoon, exactly a year after the day he met Annie, Richard left Bennett Grand carrying a brown paper bag. He reached the stone bench in Grant Park shortly before 6. Office workers moved toward buses and train stations. Runners followed the paths beneath the trees. The sun settled between the buildings, much as it had the year before. Annie arrived 10 minutes later, wearing her new shoes and carrying a textbook under one arm. You said this was an important meeting, she said. It is. Richard opened the bag and removed 2 turkey and cheese sandwiches. Annie sat beside him. Are these from the hotel kitchen? A deli 3 blocks away. Good. The hotel would have put them on a wooden board and charged $28. Richard handed her one. You've become difficult to impress. I work in hospitality. I know what bread costs. They unwrapped the sandwiches. For a while, they ate without discussing audits. board votes, or training reports. The city continued around them, no longer aware of their presence than it had been during their first conversation. Annie looked at Richard's open collar and plain jacket. "Are you still looking for work?" He considered the question. He had once thought work meant expansion, control, and being the person everyone called when a decision carried risk. Annie had taught him that useful work could also mean listening, correcting an unfair rule, or admitting that a title had protected the wrong people. "I think the right work never really ends." Annie broke her sandwich into 2 pieces and offered him one. Richard looked at the half already in his hand. "You don't have to share this time." "I know." "Then why are you doing it?" "Because you still look tired." He laughed and accepted the smaller piece. A year earlier, Annie had shared the last meal in her bag with a man she believed needed a chance. Richard had opened one door for her, but she had forced him to notice how many others remained closed. Neither had rescued the other. Annie had given Richard something no one in his company could sell him: kindness without calculation. Richard had given Annie something money could not guarantee: a fair opportunity to prove herself. What they built afterward required more than either gift. It required courage when silence was easier, patience when change moved slowly, and the willingness to hold a door open after walking through it. They remained on the bench as the afternoon light faded, 2 sandwiches between them and the next day's work waiting beyond the park. This story reminds us that a person's value cannot be measured by wealth, education, experience, or social position. Annie's kindness opened Richard's eyes, while Richard's willingness to listen gave her a fair chance to prove herself. True justice is not simply helping one person, it is changing the system so others are no longer ignored. Sometimes the smallest act of compassion can begin a change that reaches thousands of lives. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only,